If you want brows that actually last, not just for a day, not just for a week, henna is the answer. And I don't just mean the color on the hairs themselves, I mean the skin tinting too, that soft shadow beneath the brows that makes them look full and defined even first thing in the morning. This is part 2 of the full session. We've already done the wax depilation, and now we're moving into the part I personally love the most. Before any pigment touches the skin, you have to finish your tweezers work. I know this might feel like something you can skip, especially when the wax has already done most of the heavy lifting. But those last few stray hairs that wax missed, the ones growing in slightly awkward directions, the tiny hairs at the very edges of the shape, they matter. Tweezers let you be precise in a way that wax simply cannot. You're reading the brow architecture hair by hair, making micro decisions about what stays and what goes. And here's something important that a lot of clients don't realize. Doing henna right after waxing actually has a real advantage. The skin is clean, the follicles are open, and the pigment can penetrate more evenly and with better intensity. The trade-off is that post-wax skin is more reactive. You can see that pink flush around the brow area. It's completely normal. It's just increased circulation at the surface. It settles within hours. The main thing to be aware of is getting your henna consistency right. Not too runny, not too thick. So let's talk about the henna itself. The brand I work with here is OKO, and I've been consistently happy with the results. The consistency when mixed properly should feel like a smooth, soft paste, fluid enough to flow through the brush, but thick enough to hold a clean edge at the brow boundary. If it's too runny, it bleeds onto the surrounding skin and you lose that crisp line. If it's too thick, it dries too fast and you get uneven color development. Consistency is everything. The flat brush is my tool of choice for this. Some masters prefer round brushes, and I understand the appeal, they feel more like painting. But for brows, the flat brush gives you control over coverage and precision simultaneously. You're pressing pigment into both the hairs and the skin in one motion, building up layers rather than just coating the surface. This layered approach is key. I always start from the apex, the highest point of the arch, and work outward to the tail. Then I go back and fill in the head of the brow. This is intentional. The apex and tail are the most defining areas visually, so they get the first fresh layer. Then we move to the second brow. One thing I always remind myself and my students, symmetry in brow work is not about measuring, it's about reading. You're not trying to make them mathematically identical because faces are naturally asymmetric. You're trying to create the same visual weight, the same feeling of balance on both sides. The start point, the highest point, the tail angle, these need to feel harmonious together. That requires stepping back and looking at the full face constantly, rather than being locked into close-up detail mode. Once both brows are coated, there's the processing phase. And honestly, this is where a lot of the real work happens, but also where mistakes are most common. The temptation is to keep touching things up, adjusting, adding more pigment, and sometimes a small local correction is completely appropriate. But you have to be careful not to disturb the layer that's already setting. For any edge corrections, use a cotton swab or a toothpick for precision, not the brush. The goal is to let the pigment develop evenly, without streaks or uneven buildup. Here is the thing about henna. It's not a paint-by-numbers process. It's closer to developing a photograph. You set the right conditions and then you let the chemistry do its work. Room temperature, humidity, even the natural pH of the client's skin. All of these influence how the color develops and how long it takes. This is why there's no universal answer to how long do I leave it on. You learn to read the color as it progresses. You develop an instinct for it. That instinct takes time and repetition, and honestly, that's what separates good results from great ones. When it's time to remove the henna, technique still matters. Use a damp cotton pad, not soaking wet. You want to wipe away the excess without disturbing the skin tinting that's already bonded to the surface. Work from the tail toward the head, following the direction of hair growth. Don't scrub. If there's any minor bleeding of color beyond the brow edge, a light touch with a dry pad while the skin is still slightly damp usually takes care of it cleanly. Slow and deliberate always beats fast and careless here. And then comes the reveal. After all the preparation, the precision work, the layering and the waiting, you step back and you see two beautifully defined brows with that warm, rich tone that henna gives. The color immediately after removal always looks slightly intense, darker than the final result. It will soften over the next 24 hours, warm up, and settle into something more natural. I always tell clients this in advance because sometimes the first reaction is, "That looks very dark." And I always say, "Give it a day, you'll love it." And speaking of that 24-hour window, aftercare matters more than people think. For the first day, keep the brows dry. No heavy cleansers on that area, no scrubbing, no rough towel contact. The skin tinting needs time to oxidize and bond to the surface. Wash it off too aggressively and you'll lose some of that color. On the skin, henna typically lasts 2 to 3 weeks, depending on skin type and how often that zone gets cleansed. The drier the skin, the longer it holds. Have you noticed that with your own clients? Let me know in the comments. The last step is a quick spoolie pass to style the hairs and settle everything into place. The spoolie doesn't just groom, it also blends the color into the hairs more evenly and lifts any last tiny flakes of dried pigment. It's a finishing touch, and finishing touches are what separate work that looks good from work you're genuinely proud of. Because at the end of the day, every brow is a small portrait, and every portrait deserves a proper finish.